Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, comrades, all citizens of the world, wherever you're going, wherever you've been, and wherever you're at, we welcome you to the Live from the Heartland show here on YouTube. New episodes air every Friday at 9 a.m. Central Time with individual interviews posted throughout the following week. I'm your host, Michael James, encouraging you to take the chain from the brain, to get back in the people's game, because it's time to move from the lower level to the higher, from the shallower to the deeper, from the one-sided to the many, and from the abstract to the concrete. So, without further ado, let's get it on. Welcome, all you citizens of the world. I'm Michael James, and it's time for another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This is for the week of February 7th, and we're going to mix politics and sports, something we do pretty regularly on this show. We're going to have a couple of members of Protect Rogers Park talking about immigration, migration, ICE response here in Chicago. And then the renowned track coach out of the University of Illinois, Jim Knoedel, is going to talk about his new book, The Genius of Ted Haydon, and the University of Chicago Track Club. We're in a kind of a rough situation here in the United States. We have what some might call a coup. The New York Times has an article that calls it state capture. And state capture occurs when wealthy private interests influence a government to such a degree that they can freely direct policy decisions and public funds for their own benefit or for the benefit of their ideological fellow travelers, or both. So, you know, whether we call it a coup or whether we call it a state capture, we know that we don't like what's going on, and we think that the new president and his sidekick have overstepped their bounds. There's a number of suits going on. I think we'll all have to get really creative and figure out how we resist and how we fight back, but that will be the game we have to play for the next few years. I'd like to report one sad thing in addition to the political situation in the United States, and that is that our friend Gene Barge, Daddy G Barge, has passed away. He was a hell of a sax player, songwriter, producer, worked with Natalie Cole, did stuff with Muddy Waters, Rolling Stones. I got to know him working in Andy Davis films in both Stony Island and Under Siege, a number of Andy's films, and got to hang out with Gene a little bit and on the set, off the set. And we will miss him, and we are hopefully going to have Andy Davis, the director, come on in the next week or so to talk more about Gene Barge. Rest in peace, brother. The worst thing going on right now is the Department of Government Efficiency with Elon Musk raiding our government. In the sports world, there's a lot of big trades. We're going to have Cousin Adam James with his sports report coming on next week. And I think what we'll do is play a little Gene Barge music, and we'll be right back with Live from the Heartland with our first two guests, Gabe Gonzalez and Torrence Gardner of the Protect Rogers Park organization. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial, or however you're getting, viewing, or listening to Live from the Heartland. Welcome back, all you citizens of the world. It's Live from the Heartland for the week of February 7th. And I'm bringing on our first two guests for today, and they are the one and onlys, Gabe Gonzalez and Torrence Gardner. They're co-founders of Protect Rogers Park. And in these dire times with Trump in the White House and ICE running around our streets, we thought it would be really important to get some really grassroots action in response to all the negativity. So good morning to you, gentlemen.
Morning. Thank you for having us.
Tell us a little bit about Protect Rogers Park, how it came to be, and then we'll get into what it does. If you'd like to start, though, maybe just tell us what you see as the situation we're confronting.
Torrence, you want to start, or? Yeah, we started back in 2016. Basically, Gabe and Marisa and Jen and a few other folks at that time just simply got together as neighbors, quite frankly. We met at a previous Democratic Party meeting, ironically. And we kind of just gelled from there. Didn't know we were going to reconnect in life, but we all knew Trump was coming at that point. So when the Muslim ban came out at that time, with all the airport strikes and things like that, we came together literally that week, if I recall, and just said we have to protect ourselves and we need to protect our neighbors. And basically just made it very intentional. That's where the name comes out of. And from there, we had a big following where we started doing trainings and setting up our hotline system and doing a lot of other ways we can support people with resources. Sadly, we've had to bring it up again for round two. And that's where we're at currently, as you know, with the ICE raids that are now even probably more intense than they were back in 2016, quite frankly.
Torrence, let me ask you, in round one, how much action did you really have to do? Or were we just getting ready for what was to come now? It was
more getting ready and setting up the infrastructure. So we were pretty ahead this time around than other groups. So we've helped support other groups. Luckily, we had the infrastructure in place. So it was getting that infrastructure in place was the biggest thing. We didn't get a lot of calls that first round, but we did give us at least the groundwork, really, that needed some work to get that set up and organized.
Well, this kind of borders our guy, Tom Homan, who really was threatening Chicago a lot. Also, last week, kind of had to compliment the Chicago people because there was a lot of education going on among the masses, and they were having a harder time cracking people. What do you guys hear and know about what kind of action ICE has been taking around town and the ramifications of that for the citizens of Chicago?
Yeah. So Holman definitely was hoping to make a example of the city of Chicago because it's a sanctuary city and it's a sanctuary state in Illinois. And what that basically means is that local law enforcement cannot, by law, coordinate with ICE. And so Holman wanted to make an example of that. He said as much that he was going to make an example of it. And then, it depends on how you look at it, right? So in the first 3 days, we know that they grabbed up about 300 people, which is a large number given that in the previous years, they did about 300 people a day across the country. So they got about 300 just in Chicago. But to the best of our knowledge, they had 7 warrants for this. So here's an important thing. Holman comes out and Trump comes out and they say that they are going to target people who have criminal records, who are dangerous people. They want to get them off the streets and keep us safe. 7 warrants out of 300 people picked up. So what about the other 293? Who are they? And Holman's been very clear. He's just going to grab up any undocumented person who happens to be with somebody who's got either a criminal warrant or an order of deportation. So a lot of these are what they call collateral arrests. These are just people living their lives, going about their business, and getting grabbed up by ICE and deported for the civil infraction of having entered the United States without papers. And so that's what we see going on. But the flip side of that is what we've been doing. To date, and Torrence, if I get these numbers wrong, please correct me, but I believe we've trained 200 people in ICE SWATs just in the Roger.
Over 200. Yeah.
Huh?
Over 200. Yeah.
And we've got another training tomorrow. And then we are also, we've handed a lot of Know Your Rights flyers. There's a lot of organizations doing that. There's a very simple message for people. Don't open the door and don't talk to them. If they got a warrant, they're coming in. But if they don't have a warrant signed by a judge, they're not coming in. So don't let them in. And then we're also planning a big meeting coming up in 2 Saturdays on the 15th that I think Torrence could tell you a little bit more about.
Well, let's do it right now then. Tell us about it, Torrence.
Yeah. So the theme of this meeting is get action. Quite frankly, quite simple, get action. And when we say that, we've had a lot of neighbors reach out, and while we've had such a strong following at the local level, at the ground level, more than I would even say the Democratic Party, is because folks deeply just want to do something. They don't want to know if that it's something that's like a longer means or a longer mission. They just want to do something now, not for a politician. They just want to do something for their neighbors. So with that theme, we wanted to give an update on what we've gone so far. So a lot has happened, how many people have joined, some of the security infrastructure updates we put in place. And then we're going to have resource stations. These resource stations will be local orgs who are doing the work as well, and where they can get plugged in with those folks from our neighborhood, as well as ways they can plug in to protect our P directly. We do have a plan to do some more direct outreach throughout the neighborhoods. And that's a way we want to kind of get the word out and get more folks involved and get more folks who are undocumented aware of what we're doing. So this meeting will also kind of kickstart that kind of the movement of that. So again, this theme is get action, and the goal is to continuously find different action efforts throughout the months to come. For this.
How do people get a hold of you and get involved and get to go to that meeting?
Yeah, so we have an email, protectrp626@gmail.com. We monitor our email every day, and they can definitely do that. If they want to go straight to the meeting, as mentioned, it is next Saturday at Newfield Elementary.
It's at 12 to 2.
12 to 2, yeah.
At Newfield Elementary School, which is 1707 West Morris.
Yep. Thank you.
Gabe, you were talking about the first week that Holman and his boys the ICE boys rounded up 300 people. Was that the first week or the first day?
That was the first 3 days.
First 3 days. When I was recording this show last week, it was on a Wednesday, and it was really cold, and it was the first day that things were starting to happen, I think, and a lot of reporting said that 26th Street was empty, and I don't know if that was the cold or people just aware of the situation. How do we know what's going on, really? How many of those people is the still streets are empty? Are there still people hiding out inside?
Yes and no. I think we see a lot less activity. I think if you talk to local businesses, I bet they would say that as well. It's definitely true in areas. Rogers Park has a lot of migrants and a lot of refugees, but there, in places like Little Village or Brighton Park, there's even more. So I think we see a lot of that, but more to the point, people are just plain scared, and this is really important. And this is about why we're having that meeting coming up, right? Like, the Trump administration has no intention of deporting 16 million people. It's a physical impossibility.
Right.
They physically can't do it. They don't want to do it because a lot of these people, unfortunately, prop up our economy, but they are threatening it, and they're making people scared, and that's what they want. They want people scared. And so we're combating that by bringing the neighborhood together and saying that, like, you're not going to frighten us into complicity. You're not going to frighten us into hiding. We're one neighborhood, regardless of our immigration status, and we're going to stay as one neighborhood. And I think that message is really important, is that collectively we've got to come together and fight back on this, because this is the tip of the iceberg. The only way they win is by keeping people scared and keeping them down. And they're going to go after immigrants. They're going to go after trans and LGBTQ folks. They're going to go after African Americans. They're going to go after anybody, people looking for abortions. They're going to try and keep them all down so that they can do whatever they want to do. And we need to fight this now, and we need to fight it consistently.
In preparation for fighting things, how do you spot ICE? What do they look like? Do they have vehicles? And what has happened in Rogers Park so far? I saw some reports they were on Loyola's campus. I've seen reports they were up on the L. You got any info on any of that stuff?
Yeah, both of those instances, they weren't.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fear and a lot of overreaction. They have been in the neighborhood. We identified at least 2 for certain. There may have been more. In one instance, we got there in about 20 minutes, but they were already gone. In the other instance, it's about 15 minutes after we got the call, there were 12 neighbors outside ready to document and lend support if they got in the building. But luckily, the person there knew their rights and wouldn't let them in, and they had to leave. There's a lot of rumors flying around, and it's really important that people not overreact, like react quickly, but also not overreact and spread rumors that have not been verified one way or another. One thing we would suggest that people do is they can come to our Migro Watch training. Like I said, there's one tomorrow. They can email us and get information about it, and we can share that with them. What's the email again? I'm so terrible.
protectrp626@gmail.com.
Yeah, that's good. I hope a lot of people come to that meeting and learn more about it. What is the status of the immigration courts? Is that an obstacle to Trump and to Musk and Homan, that there are a backlog in the courts? There's some due process for people, or is the due process kind of being thrown out the window and people being shipped off to places like Guantanamo?
Yeah, I mean, the courts would matter if the guy believed in the law.
Yeah, exactly. We're on President times, Michael.
That's a question.
Challenging.
What's going to happen in the court?
He's being challenged in court, right? And we'll see if it lives up. But I think he believes he's not going to get much intervention from other institutions, and so we're getting challenged with the separation of powers right now at all levels.
Well, you both are on the ground and active in trying to protect people and protect their rights. What's your sense about where this goes? We were just referencing that who knows what's happening, but do you see the people who, there's plenty of people who support Trump and voted for Trump and are not opposed to, sending migrants who have criminal records back to their countries of origin. But they're not so big on him going after families, breaking up families, arresting innocent people. But do they care? Do you think people out there are going to care? You think there's going to be a kind of a groundswell of reaction to this? Are you magicians? Can you tell me the answer to that?
Right. I'll put it this way. I think we have to go in phases. I'm a big fan of chess. So right now we're in the opening moves. We're seeing the opening moves is his blitz in the government, him and Elon. Can't forget about Elon Musk and the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, and what they're doing, because that is truly impactful on families in America. And we'll see how that plays with their unpopularity or what happens with that long term, because then people will see it's not just undocumented folks being messed with. But I would say this is the opening salvo. We're doing the fight back. We're countering. We're setting up the counter moves right now. And then after the opening is done, we're into the middle game. The middle game, I think, is where more Americans are going to face different persecutions and different hits to their wallet or to their livelihood. And then I think we'll see what next moves we have to make from there. But it is a little difficult to say because right now we're in the blitz. I think he's throwing everything at everything to see what lands and what sticks. And then we'll see what the courts do.
Do you guys, as activists on the ground, dealing with incursions into our neighborhood, do you have any sense or suggestion to the Democratic Party what they should be doing and how they should act. Some people feel they're a little too timid. Some people are saying they haven't figured out and told others in the community what to do. I know they're trying to figure it out, but do you have any sense about where this leaves the Democratic Party? All of us have been involved with the 49th Ward Democratic Party, which is a pretty progressive outfit, and we wish more Democrats were like us. But what's your take on the national scene with the party?
I mean, I don't think that they have any idea what they're doing.
Agreed.
I mean, we've got great local leaders, and we're very grateful for the folks that represent Rogers Park, but I don't
We are lucky.
Yeah.
Democratic Party has any idea what they're doing. They're really back on their heels, and there's a reason for it, right? Like I was talking with some friends about this the other day. Ever since Citizens United, both the Republican and Democratic parties are the same paymasters, and everybody knows that. Like, you can't talk to working class America and have them believe for a second that the Democrats represent their interests, because I don't think they do. So we need to sort of reinvent all of this. We need to reinvent like how we're going to work together and our sense of community, and we need to do it immediately. You know, the national parties, I think, are really bereft of ideas, and the Republican Party is essentially a kleptocracy, right? They're just ripping people off. The Democratic Party doesn't have any ideas, so we need to rebuild it. We need to start locally, and we need to build up. That's why we're doing this. We're not Protect the North Side. We're not Protect Chicago. We're Protect RP, because this is our community. It's where we live. This is where we can engage in conversation and talk to each other. And that's all of this is about keeping each other safe by building community. And maybe from that, we can give the Democratic Party some ideas.
Yeah, National Democratic Party needs to reverse back to learning what local really means. I think they need to really see what partnerships they can maybe partner with local orgs if they really do care at the national level. But until you see new leadership that have not been in there for over 25 years, I think that's going to be hard to change, to be quite frank. We need new young leaders in there who've been kind of cut out or not allowed opportunity to even get into politics at a higher level that many folks have just been sitting in for quite some time. So I think that would be a big thing as well.
Well, we've always been advocates of grassroots organizing and doing things from the bottom up. And, you know, Chicago has had a lot of that. Let me ask, we only got a couple minutes left. What other groups around the city do you know of that are doing similar activities or other activities that you would want to share a little information on? Are there other wards? Are there other, you know, sections of town?
They're all over this. I'm looking for there's a flyer that has a phone number that is really important for people to know. Like, so there are groups that are popping up like this all over the city and working in similar ways, right? And so we, regardless of your neighborhood, regardless of where you live, we would encourage people to get involved in that. You can find lots and lots of them all over.
So our Illinois Coalition for Immigration and Refugee Rights hotline number is 855-435-7693. People can email us at protectrp626@gmail.com.
And your training session is on the 15th at Newfield School on Morse Avenue, just east of Clark Street, from noon to 2.
Correct.
Okay, you each have 30 seconds. Give us a pep talk. What do you want people to do?
Well, like I started with, get action. Get action. Honestly, we can't just stay frozen. We need to be nimble and active at a time like this. They expect us to not. They expect us to be terrorized.
Thanks, Torrence. And how about you, Gabe?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're safer together. Get involved, come out, get engaged. We're all safer when we're all together.
I want to thank you both for coming on, and I want to say that I think we can all be proud in the 49th Ward of a lot of things, but right now, Protect RP is really in the forefront, setting an example. And I want to encourage all our listeners to stay tuned. We're going to have a short musical break from Gene Barge, our friend who just passed away at 98. And we'll be right back with more live from the Heartland. We're going to talk about the Genius of Ted Haydon and the University of Track Club with the renowned author Jim Knoedel. Be right back.
Well, I'm going away, baby, and I won't be back no more. Yes, darling, going away, baby, won't be back no more. If I find me a good girl, I won't be back at all.
Welcome back, you citizens of the world. And for the second half of our show today, we're really honored to bring on a good friend and the longtime track coach for 21 years, recently retired at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And before that, he was a track coach for a time at Iowa State, at Drake, at Northwestern, and Loyola. And it's the one and only Jim Knoedel, who has, upon retirement, started writing books, and he has become quite the prolific writer. He has the Golden Era, Tale of Two Runners, A Long Road Ahead, Run Like a Girl, Girl on the Run, and now, not a novel, but an actual kind of biography about the legendary Chicago track coach at the University of Chicago Track Club, Ted Haydon. That's Ted, Haydon. And Ted is quite a monumental figure in track and field, but it's just a human being. So, Jim, let's tell us a little bit about why you decided to switch from writing novels to writing this wonderful book that kept me up pretty late last night.
Well, it's a good story because originally I'm a good friend with Al Carius. He's the coach at North Central. He's won 19 national championships out there in cross country, and he ran for the University of Chicago Track Club. And he's always maintained that he should have a book. Ted should have a book written about him. And he had kind of, I don't want to say pestered me, but he had encouraged me over and over and over. And so I got the bug and I started writing a little bit. But it's been a true joy to write because Ted Haydon was involved in so much during the 50s, 60s, 70s with track and field. He was at the center point. And so I found a lot of great stories about him. And his former athletes are extremely loyal. They speak nothing but highly of him. So he was a very unique character, and I've really enjoyed the task.
The book is filled with reports from the Chicago Maroon, which is a newspaper at the University of Chicago. Just a lot of you had to do a lot of research. You were digging deep on this.
Yeah.
Let's hear a little bit about Ted Haydon, how he started out. He came out of Canada. His dad was a minister who ended up coming to the University of Chicago as a professor. Ted went to school in South Shore. He then went to the University of Chicago. He then went off to become a social worker. He then went back to the University of Chicago and became a track coach. Fill in the details on some of that.
Well, it was interesting because his dad was a renowned minister in Saskatchewan in Canada. And he was actually, they removed him from his church because they thought his views were so radical, which is somewhat of an unusual thing. So I think that's the reason why he came down to the University of Chicago. He got his PhD at University of Chicago and then eventually took over the religion department at the University of Chicago. But so Ted Haydon was actually born in Canada, came to the United States when he was about 10 years old, and they moved immediately to Chicago, and he lived in the Hyde Park or the South Shore neighborhoods for his entire life while he's in Chicago. So he's got quite a storied background doing that.
I found it real familiar because my dad grew up in South Shore and at 7200 on Euclid, and I think Ted is 7200 on another street nearby.
Close, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
right.
And my dad went to the U of C and did play under Alonzo Stagg for a year. And you do mention Stagg in the book, who is a famed football coach. So how did Ted end up becoming the track coach, and how did he end up founding the University of Chicago Track Club?
But it was interesting because his career initially out of college was as a social worker. And he started with a program called CAPS, Chicago Area Project. It was started by Irwin Shaw. It was a big movement in the late 20s and early 30s. And their goal was to support people from within the communities. There were other places like the Hull House on the UIC campus where they had a building that they came to work their programs. Ted actually went to the families and worked with them. He worked with social clubs in the area, churches, worked with the police, worked with the education to get them involved in how to better their lives. He had quite an interesting neighborhood because he was located on the near north, near west sides of the city of Chicago. Man. And I always tell people to give a rough idea of where he started his social work. In 1929, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre occurred on 2100 block of North Clark Street. That's where Ted worked. Now, that was in 1929, and he didn't start his social work until 1933, but it was certainly only 4 years later. That certainly had to be rough neighborhoods that he was working in.
Yeah, and reading about it, I could identify with it. I spent a lot of time in like Uptown and other places doing, radical community organizing. And he was like a community organizer. And I sensed from reading the book and talking with you that his politics were kind of progressive.
Very much so, yeah. He was not a political person per se. He never talked about his beliefs. He was involved largely in the humanist movement, which was big in the 20s and 30s in the United States. And his father actually had services, I guess you'd call them services, because Ted was not religious at all. He was involved with no religion. But they had services with the Humanist Society on a weekly basis, and they usually spoke to 200 to 300 people.
One of the things that I found, there's so many little nuggets in your book, but at one point, he talked to people who lived in the suburbs about how they viewed their life, and they complained about everything. And then he talked to these immigrants in the poor neighborhoods, and they were blissed out being here and participating in America. Too bad maybe some people feel that way today, immigrants, but right now I think they're living in fear from the new Trump administration.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about Ted Haydon's kind of philosophy. He was a guy who really was into running for fun, and he encouraged that. And he was, clearly when he set up the University of Chicago Track Club, it was for all people who were eligible, not just elite runners. Maybe address that, Jim. What are the University of Chicago Track Club compared to others? Are there still a lot of track clubs out there? What's the deal?
Yeah, no, his beliefs came from the humanist movement. And I think he learned a lot from his father, but he believed that everyone should be involved in the track club. That was very unique about the UCTC, was that he didn't care if you were bad like me or good like a Rick Woolhitcher, who was a world record holder. He had everyone on the team. So there would be people at track meets that would be lapped 2 and 3 times in a mile, and didn't bother him. That was certainly fine. So he wanted to make sure everyone was involved. So often the clubs you hear of, like the New York Athletic Club and the Southern California Striders, they only wanted the elite, the best of the best. He wanted everyone. So that was very unique about what he espoused. And I think that was a unique thing about the track club. He didn't care how good you were. He just wanted you to have fun.
Well, you have a description of how he would run different heats, and run them right after each other. But who could run under 2 minutes? Who could run under 2:05? Yeah. And so he included a lot of people, and there were a lot of. I noticed that a lot of the people who participated, elites who participated with the UC Track Club, didn't necessarily live here. Like Brian Oldfield.
Oldfield, yes.
He's from Elgin, but he wasn't living here and wasn't. But he participated. Talk a little bit about how he balanced these elite athletes and what attracted them to come to him, and also dealt with the community and the community at large and involving people and letting them in.
Yeah, it was a very unique club because most clubs, when you think of a club that was invented in the 1950s, they had meetings, they had dues, they had newsletters, they had all kinds of things. Ted had very little of that stuff. He didn't care if you lived in Minneapolis. There were guys that lived in Lawrence, Kansas. There were ones that lived in Muncie, Indiana. He had guys that lived in New York. Didn't matter where you were trained from. So amazingly, a lot of the guys on the team didn't even know each other because they only saw each other at meets. They didn't train together. Probably the only person that trained regularly on the UFC track was Rick Woolholzer. Rick ran at Notre Dame, set 3 world records during his career with the club. He was named the Athlete of the Year in 1973. So he had very, very elite athletes, but it was such a unique situation because he didn't give workouts unless you asked for them. So if you wanted to be told how to do the workout, he would tell you. If you wanted to do his own workout, that was fine with you. So he was a very unique. He was so unlike. You hear some coaches. Bill Easton was one at the University of Kansas during the 40s and 50s. Very regimented, very strict. Ted was the exact opposite. In fact, he had a saying at practices. He wrote down results at every single practice. And he put after your name, if he had SUSS, that means showed up, shot the shit. So he'd have acronyms like that. But he was a very laid back, very easygoing guy. So people loved to run for him. And I think they had such a great time.
Well, he did a lot of humorous remarks on his notes for people. He had quite a sense of humor. And one of the other things that caught my attention was he seemed to be a major player in creating running opportunities for post-collegiate athletes. Talk about that, what the history of that is and what happened to athletes and then how it opened up. And it's certainly at the University of Chicago, maybe other places.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was very well, most college coaches, after you graduate, I don't say they want nothing to do with you, but they're not paid to coach some of these elite athletes. And so they have nowhere to go. And Ted provided opportunities for athletes that were out of college. They found jobs in Chicago and they ended up getting involved with the club because he didn't care if you trained with him, if you lived in the area, if you had any involvement with the university. He was willing to give you the opportunity to run for the club. And that's why over the years, he had 17 Olympians from the UCTC. And that's going all the way back to 1956 to 1984. So he had a lot of great athletes. And I think his philosophy meshed with what was, Tom Cooney, the former coach at Loyola, he always spoke about how highly he thought of Ted because he provided opportunities that no one else provided for post-collegiate athletes.
Including Cooney. He said he ran into Cooney in the airport. I think Cooney was heading to Louisville for a track meet or something, and Ted was short a guy and got Cooney, who was quite an outstanding athlete in his day, to run the last leg of a relay.
Yeah. No, there are numerous instances of that. There was another kid that was recruited. He went up to watch a meet up in Kenosha, and Ted Haydon recruited him. They needed an extra man for the cross-country team, and Ted recruited him and got him out of the club. Well, the guy just went up there to watch, and ended up they won the meet because of his participation. So, there's a million stories like that, and I think you'll find if you read the book, it's like it's little vignettes of things that occurred during the time of the club. But he had some great athletes. I mean, they had a spell in there with their 2-mile relays where I think they won the national title 8 out of the 10 years in a row. So they had quite a successful program there. And actually they set the world record twice in the indoor 2-mile relay and once in the outdoor 2-mile relay. So tremendous squad. I mean, they had some of the best with Ken Sparks and Bob O'Connor, and who was Loyola grad, and Lowell Paul was at Kansas, and then Rick Walter. They had great squads. So they were an impressive group. Tom Bach, a kid from Northwestern, was another one that was involved. So there were quite a few that were from other schools, had nothing to do with the university, but ran for the club.
You know, throughout the book, you mentioned a lot of names, and some of them I heard, most of them I have never heard before. But one name that came up is Zeus Preckwinkle. Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting story, how he got involved, who he is. And maybe you'd like to share a little bit of that story, because he was married to our Cook County, what is her title? Tony Preckwinkle.
President of the
Cook County Board. And a wonderful person.
You know, Tony is interesting because I talked with her for the book, because one of the things that Ted said about the club, if you think you're a member of the club, then you are. So when I called her, one of the things I asked Tony was, I said, do you think you're a member of the club? She said, well, I timed. I supported him with donations. So yes, I'm a member of the club. So Tony is a member of the club, but Zeus, her husband at the time, is also a member of the club. And he was unique because he had issues when he was young. He ended up joining the club just off a whim, and probably one of the most well-known members of the club. He lives in the Philippines right now, and I interviewed him through Facebook in the Philippines for this book. But he has a million stories, and he's continuing to run today, and he continues to support Ted and all he brought into the program in Chicago, because he feels like he was a valued member where a New York athletic club could have cared less about him. So he's always thankful for that opportunity.
One of the big struggles that is documented in the book is between the sanctioning bodies, the Amateur Athletic Union, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, and I'm not sure who started it and how it fit in, but the USA Track and Field, who I had a little grudge against, because I had been to some NC2A championships out in Eugene, Oregon, and I tried to go to Knoxville, and I didn't get a press pass. I think the guy must have been a right winger and knew anyhow. That's not important. But give us a little information on whatever I just asked you. What was that?
Well, the AAU NCAA, it was a battle that, a lot of people weren't aware of, but because it started way back in the late 20s, early 20s, actually. But it was a battle because the AAU controlled who was on the Olympic team and who was coaching for the Olympic team. So the NCAA had no voice, and that was part of the issue initially. NCAA, well, we provide 50% of the athletes and probably 90% of the coaches, so we should have a voice. But the AAU would not give it to them. And so it became a big battle. And it came to a head for Ted Haydon in 1962 at the holiday meet, which is probably the most famous meet with the University of Chicago Track Club. But at the holiday meet, Ted had to get a dual sanction, which means insurance approval. And it means, so he had to get one from the NCAA and also from the AAU. Well, when the AAU found out he did that, they said, you're not going to run any more meets with open athletes at all. Well, because the UCTC, Ted was the coach at University of Chicago. So he was a college coach and a club coach. He had a dual. He was one of the rare coaches that was in that situation. So when he had the next meet coming up, they told him, AAU told him, if you host this meet with any athletes, they will be ineligible to compete on USA teams. And the same with the coaches. Any coach involved in this will not be involved in any USA team. Well, Ted didn't know what to do. So what he ended up was a unique, I say in the book that it was something out of the Marx Brothers, and I would say that's probably true. He had a practice meet. So he had all the athletes come up. He talked to them before the meet. He said, we're not going to keep any scores. We're not going to measure any heights. We're not going to have any times, any distances. So the coaches have to keep track of that themselves. Well, when the Tribune found out about that, they actually came out to cover the meet because it was such a unique situation. And to give you an idea, there were articles on this meet in the New York Times, the Chicago's, it was the Chicago Tribune, Chicago Daily News. So this was a national thing, the conflict between the two, and Ted was the one involved. So his solution at the holiday meet to have dual backfired. And so he ended up just having to have practice meets. So his indoor meets the rest of the year, because they were hosted by the club, but ran with college athletes also, he had to have practice meets for the next 3 meets. And so he dealt with it and eventually got solved. But it didn't get solved till 1978. So it was an ongoing issue. And Ted was the one that was in the middle of it.
You know, one of the things I was talking to our friend Gordon Thompson, who was also a track coach at Loyola with you, and he said that Dick Gregory, who I remember had run track at Southern Illinois, was a member of the club, was the MC at UC Track Club events. And then Gordon also said that sometimes Ted would do things like have music, like have violins and drums at the events. You remember any of that? Or
his banquets were like nothing you've ever seen, because there's some years he would have like Avery Brundage. Avery Brundage was the head of the IOC, International Olympic Committee. Yes, very right wing, International Olympic Committee, from maybe late 40s till 1972. But he was the elite. You got the leader of the world organization to speak to the club. So he had him speak one time, but he also had people like Dick Gregory. And Dick Gregory did his routines at the club banquets. And so to think in 1959, Dick Gregory was a no one, although he's actually a good runner. He was MVP at Southern Illinois. He was a no one. He did it for 2 years and he bombed both times. And then he came back in 61 and he did a great job. And so he started going on circuits. He ended up going to the Playboy Club in Chicago, did a routine there. He got discovered by Time Magazine writer and ended up on the Jack Parr show, which is the precursor to Johnny Carson. So you just had a little bit of everything. I mean, there would be Zeus would juggle balls while he played a piccolo. There'd be people, Jim Haydon, Ted's son, would play music during the events. You had, world record holders, you had lead people, and then you also had, some of the wildest stuff you've ever seen in an organization. So he was quite a character. Ted was something else.
What happened to the University of Chicago Track Club? I didn't, when I was looking it up, the last information I saw was 2023. Is it still going on?
No, it's not anymore, unfortunately, because one of the things that was unique about the club was it was a marriage between a club and the university. When Ted died in 1985, they lost that connection. The other coaches that came in, Mike Arisha, Mike Karlik, tried to continue it, but the university discouraged the connection more and more and more. And the connection was important because without the university coach having access to facilities for the club, it wasn't going to work. So it became an issue. And I'd say they held the last holiday meet about 2 years ago. It was during the pandemic was the last meet in 21, and they haven't had a meet since. So there's really no University of Chicago Track Club, which is sad.
Give us a brief hit on running programs, track and field programs at colleges around the area. What should we look for? What teams are? I mean, North Central has a team, Loyola. Who's really good? Who's hot these days?
Yeah, there's some good programs. I know North Central is predominantly one of the top Division III schools in the nation. They have great distance running program. They've done a phenomenal job. But I know upcoming meets we have. The Big East Championships are going to be held at the Gately track in the Pullman neighborhood. That's going to be the end of the month. And I know the Missouri Valley, the following 2 days, are going to be hosting their conference meet at Gately again. So they've done well. But I know that Loyola track team has done well in cross country. They won their conference meet, I think, 3 times in a row with women in cross country, and they won it twice with the men. So they're doing
that's one thing I was going to ask you about women, because talking about athletes in the book at UC Track Club, no mention of women. Just for only one first woman I heard besides his mother and his daughter was his, I think, assistant or something.
Yeah, Rebecca Redmond. Yeah, one of the issues was people don't realize back in the 70s there weren't programs for women. And so you just didn't have women. And so I tried to delve into that more, but I could only find two women who ran for the club, literally. It's hard to find them. And so I wanted to have something like that. And Ted was very welcoming because Karen said he was very helpful. He always took her to meets. She would ride along with the team to go to meets and stuff like that. And she ran for the UCTC, still has her singlet. But it just wasn't an era. Title IX, the NCAA didn't have women's cross country until 1981. So it's like Ted died in 85. So
we like Title IX. Yeah, Ted, another thing I saw in the book was Reese Park and the Reese Park Striders. And I remember in the early days of the Heartland Cafe, I had just taken up running a few years before, going out to Reese Park. So I may have been at one of those meets that he was still alive at in 75.
Yeah, probably.
Let me ask you, I'm going to throw in real quickly that there is a track meet at down at the University of Chicago in the Henry Crown Fieldhouse on February 22nd. And the thing I wanted to ask you was, why would you recommend this book to people who are not track people, who are not runners?
I think anyone would enjoy this, honestly, because Ken was such a unique character. He just had a great sense of humor. He was so laid back, easygoing. And I think you would see that he was, from 1950 to 1985, he was probably one of the most involved coaches in the track, in the national scene of anyone. So he was certainly a big time. And you would enjoy it, I guarantee everyone.
Yeah, it's a fun book. I mean, partly because I like the topic and I know a little bit about the subject, but I also think that people would enjoy it. I want to thank all of our guests today, Gabe Gonzalez and Torrence Gardner from Protect Rogers Park. I want to thank Jim Knoedel for talking about his new book, The Genius of Ted Haydon and the University of Chicago Track Club. And of course, I want to thank our engineer, Hal James, our producers, Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, and Lynn Orman. We encourage you all to do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do more than ever. All power to the people. See you next week. We want to thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show. New episodes air every Friday beginning at 9 a.m. Central Time. Episodes air each following Thursday on CAN TV, 9 p.m. in Sweet Home Chicago on Channel 21 or streaming everywhere else at cantv.org. Audio episodes go live on WLUW each Saturday, 9 a.m. on the left end of your dial at 88.7 FM or streaming everywhere worldwide at WLUW.org. They're available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform and are also broadcast on Lumpin' Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpinradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, remember, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
Come to limb. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing